What kind of occurred to me when I read the title of this conference here, Happiness and Its Causes, I suppose what we are doing here in trying to interpret what the causes of happiness are, it seemed to me that there is a very short answer to what the cause of happiness is. And the answer is that the causes of happiness are sitting here. Each one of you is sitting in a chair where the cause of your happiness is sitting before you. In other words, we can't really tell you, nobody can tell you how to reach happiness except yourself. And happiness doesn't exist as an entity that somehow we are chasing and trying to reach, because there is no happiness except for what's inside of yourself. And nobody can really make you happy, just as in many ways nobody can make you unhappy either. But then the question, of course, becomes, okay, if each one of us is responsible and in control of their happiness, how do you get it? Because unfortunately, not everybody is happy, in fact. Even though all the surveys show that most people are above a kind of middling level of happiness and very few people are completely unhappy, the fact is that very few people also are really as happy as they expected to be or could be. So the question is about the causes of happiness is really, how do we make it possible for ourselves to feel this level of fully living that has been called happiness. From time immemorial, people distinguished between being fully alive and feeling depressed, feeling anxious. And there is a level of experience that we all recognize as being, okay, seems to be happy. And it's represented in many forms. The dance and songs that preceded this more boring lecture is an expression of happiness, trying to express something that we all recognize and we all would like occasionally to experience. There was a poet you all heard about, Dante Alighieri, who in Italy wrote one of the most famous epic poems called the Divine Comedy. And he wrote once, this is 700 years ago, so a long time ago, he wrote that people really feel that any living thing feels most fully alive and enjoyed living when he or she is able to express who they are. They can express what they feel, what they would like to feel, and they act that out. And the expression of life, in a sense, is what we would call happiness. It's what we are, when we are fully expressing our strengths, whether the strength is a strength of creating beauty or a moral strength or a physical strength, somehow we are able to say, yes, this is who we are. This is what I am and this is what I can do. And when you are able to do that, you experience something that makes life suddenly matter, that you feel that, yes, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is who I am. Now, that realization is one that came to me partly from my own experience of World War II, which I spent in Europe, which made me aware that some people, even under the worst circumstances, seem to maintain their integrity, their purpose, their joy, whereas others, once they lose their supports of financial well-being or status, or their property is lost, they kind of crumble and they become empty shells in many ways. They become bitter and unable to function. So I became, as a child, already interested in trying to figure out what makes the difference between people who have an inner strength or habits that they have cultivated in their lives that make them able to enjoy life regardless of the external circumstances, and those who survive essentially by leaning on the supports that their society provides them, and once those supports disappear, they themselves are helpless. So when I started psychology, I became interested in answering those questions, and what the kind of result was what I tried to present in 18 minutes from now, although it took me about 40 years to get here, but anyway. Flow this is a kind of a summary of what I tried to say in the past few minutes, that you can live either as a pawn of external forces, or you can live, you can master your own destiny to a certain extent. And this act of living under your own control rather than being pulled by the strings of fortune and fate, that's what I call flow. And this is something I simply learned by talking to people who seem to have some passion about life that differentiated them from everyday people. And I call this flow because the people themselves started talking, when they described how it felt to be truly alive, to be completely functioning, they used the metaphor of being like carried by a river, carried by a current, and feeling that there is no necessity to worry or make choices because you're carried on by a force, almost internal force that works outside. And as I say, this happens when we sing, we dance, as happened just a few minutes ago here, when we do sports. But then very quickly I realized that the interesting part is not about flow. It's not that you can do it when you separate yourself from everyday life and you do something artistic or athletic, but you can do flow when you're studying, when you're working, when you're at home and with the family. And that's really the best application of flow, is how you can use it in everyday life. Now, but today I will talk about our work with athletes and artists because that's where it's easier to see what flow is about. So the first, okay, let's see. The first condition of flow is that you are focusing your attention on a very restricted field of stimuli until you get fully concentrated and completely involved. Now, that is in contrast to what happens to us in everyday life, where there are distractions constantly pulling and pushing on our attention, with the fact that to the extent that we lose control over our attention because we have to move it, we're pulled by outside forces or stimuli. I mean, just the cell phone or the traffic on the road or whatever, or the telephone or the people who stop us at work. And all of that results in our diffusing attention, but more importantly, of feeling that the control over our life is being taken over. And now this, so in games or sports, you get to the point where you can really focus for hours sometimes, like in chess, for instance, where you can spend half a day without having to change your focus. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening in your head when you're playing in a tournament. You are anticipating hundreds of possible moves and the consequences over time of those moves and how. So you are very active mentally, but you are concentrated. And as it says, you could, in fact, we had people for whom the ceiling fell off and they didn't notice until afterwards, and the people were cleaning their jacket from the plaster that fell down. But so it's not an exaggeration that you can achieve that concentration in any game form or any aesthetic, artistic form. You get there. In everyday life, we would like to have this too, occasionally at least, but it is much harder. And the question is how to organize life so that you can have that concentration in every day. There comes a point when you are no longer focusing attention consciously. You are simply, the attention gets so involved in the activity that it moves by itself without conscious control over it. And that's, for instance, this rock climber who's up in Yosemite in California, and he's saying that you get to the point when you forget that you are climbing. You feel that you're part of the rock. You're part of the winds that are blowing and the sunshine, and all of this is you have a role of trying to move up, but you are doing that because this is what you have to do if you want to experience this feeling. And you are in harmony with what you're doing. You are not under obligation. It's an inner feeling of being part of this activity. The other thing is that people say that you have, when you are so involved in these activities, you are not worried anymore about things that could go wrong, because, as we'll see later, you are prepared for it. The flow experience rarely happens by itself. It's the culmination of having prepared yourself in some way or the other, either by learning music or by climbing or by, in this case, for instance, this is a former student of mine, Susan Jackson, who teaches here in Australia, and she has interviewed many Olympic athletes. Cyclists are her favorite, And here is this peloton moving together and being able, the chances of falling or interfering with each other are there, but you don't feel them because you said, okay, I learned how to do this, I'm good at it, and now it's going by itself. And people say I'm climbing a rock like the ones before we saw, I feel safer there than trying to cross an intersection in a big city where I don't know, a taxi driver may run into me or whatever. Here I am in control. I have my life in my hands, so to speak. Then you get to the point where your attention is so taken by what you're doing that you really start forgetting yourself as a separate person. For instance, one of the first professions we studied where flow seems to be very widespread is surgery. Surgeons usually, if you ask them how does it feel to do surgery, they will use, they find analogies from sport. They say, oh, it's like skiing a lot, or it's like sailing, or it's like whatever sport they know about, they use that analogy to describe surgery because it requires this great concentration and very, very fine muscle coordination and holding the scalpel and so forth. But you're not aware of anything else. You're not aware of the problems you have as a citizen, as a father, as a mother, as whatever you are in other roles in life. Now you are simply there purely as a surgeon who has a difficult task to accomplish. And the other thing is that you forget time. Here is a disco dancer describing how it is to, and this description is very common actually, that in retrospect, when you look back on what happened, it seems like just a few minutes. What you did lasted a few minutes only. And by what you're doing it, you are not even aware of time at all. It's not an issue. You're just moving along with what's happening. That's partly why we call this the flow experience. And when all of these conditions are present, the activity becomes autotelic. And autotelic means that the Greek word, two words, auto means self, and telos is goal. Autotelic, the goal is just to do the activity. You're not concerned about even succeeding or getting paid or any of those things. Even the surgeon gets paid a lot of money, of course, and has a high status. But the fact is that unless the surgeon experiences flow, he will soon become sloppy and uninterested in doing the best of what he's doing if he's in it only for the money. But usually surgeons begin to find in precision, excellence of performance, the goal, not in what happens after and however much money they may make as a result of it. Here is, for instance, quite well-known American composer who also trains young people to play in orchestra. And this is what he says when I asked him, what do you tell young people about what they can expect in the future as musicians? And this is what he says. Don't expect a damn thing, do it because you love it. And that is a definition of being autotelic. And the goal is to just do it because you love it, and then hope that you can make some money out of it if that's how you want to make a living. So these are the conditions for flow. Now the question is, how does flow happen? Okay, one thing is that flow occurs not when you have a long-term goal. The long-term goal is necessary often, but that's not where flow comes. So flow comes from being able to do right the next thing. If you are playing a musical instrument, you don't play it in order to get to the end. You play it for the next note, the next chord. And then when it's over, when you finish, you say, gee, I wish it would continue, but the song ends, but you don't play it to end. And the rock climber here again says that climbing is, you have to decide every move what the next move is, and that process of deciding, do I put my fingers up here or down here? It makes a big difference. Here you have to pull yourself up and spend energy. Here you don't go as far up, and so you have to decide which is the best way to do the next move, and that is very important. Then after the goals is you get feedback to what you're doing, you hear the music you're playing, or you notice that you're still on the wall instead of falling down the rock. You're still there, so that's good feedback. And then the final condition, which is very important, is the balance between what can be done and what you can do. That is what the challenge of the situation and your ability to meet up with it. And this was the original way I tried to describe that. You have skills going this horizontally and challenges vertically, and the flow occurs in that diagonal when the two are in balance. Since then, anxiety is high challenge, low skill. Boredom is high skill, low challenge. And a person starts at A, playing something very simple, but after a while you get bored and playing that. And then if you want to continue, enjoy playing, you have to up the challenge, play something more difficult. And then you're back in flow. And you can stay there for a while unless your parents tell you to play Chopin when you just started, and then you're up in anxiety, and at that point you can quit because it's too difficult. Or you can say, well, if I develop my skills, I can go back into flow. So this is the progression of flow over time, and I can tell you that this is how we live our life. Between these different aspects of how much skill and challenge relate to each other. And arousal, flow, and control are all very positive in a sense. And then it gets worse as we go. Apathy is worse for some people, and anxiety for others, but it's because that's when you can't really express who you are. In apathy, you have nothing to do and you have no skills. You feel you are just a lump with nothing to do. You're out of life. And anxiety, you feel overwhelmed. So time left, 0 minutes. Okay, sorry. I hope we have a chance to talk outside of this venue. Thank you very much.